In which case, Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dido. So just a couple of things to highlight in the report. I think obviously since we last met, the NHS has passed 70 and a phenomenal opportunity to celebrate the country's most loved institution, the NHS that we work for. So that was great. I think it also was the time at which the Prime Minister announced the new 5-year funding settlement for the NHS, 3.4% revenue uplift that the NHS is now clear about for the next 5 years. And at that time, also the NHS leadership has been commissioned to prepare the long-term plan that I refer to in the board report. Importantly, I think this plan will set out not only the clinical improvements that we need to see in cancer, mental health, the care of older people, cardiovascular disease and maternal and child health, which is really important, but it also will have the opportunity to work with the NHS to describe how we need to organise ourselves to remain a highly efficient and effective healthcare delivery system for the next 5 and indeed 10 years. So I think significant work for us to do. Importantly, it's going to need to very clearly identify how the available new resource that has been committed to the NHS will be spent. And we have 5 key financial tests to deliver as part of that, ensuring overall that the NHS remains in financial balance, but also that provider deficits are addressed over that period using the new money. So work we'll be engaged in, we'll be talking more about this, will include a major focus on improving transformation, productivity and efficiency, making sure that we use every pound of the new money wisely, a new financial architecture for the NHS, important I think particularly for providers, a new way of ensuring that money moves around the system, moving beyond current control totals and the sustainability monies that we've got, and having a look at how tariff and payment systems will work. And importantly as well, a view on how the NHS itself should be organised. So the development of structures for supporting the integration of care that we know we need and that will form an integral part of the plan, and looking at the roles of organisations within that. So I think it's going to be a significant piece of work that we'll be engaging in across the summer, and look forward for NHSI working with our colleagues in NHSE to be working together on this and engaging with the NHS to develop this plan over the summer. So overall I think this is a fantastic opportunity that we've got to build on what is great about the NHS, but reflect that the NHS now needs to change to further improve. And having got the resource envelope clear, I'm certainly looking forward for NHSI to continue to play its part in that. Alongside that planning, the report also refers to our ongoing joint working programme with NHS England, which remains very important. Our aim, just remind ourselves, our aim remains to move from separate and sometimes fragmentary leadership support to the NHS to a cohesive national leadership of the NHS, and that's why this board in May supported the move to get ever closer to our colleagues in NHS England through the creation of the joint venture. That process is ongoing, and we intend to make the most senior appointments in the joint NHSEI executive team before the end of the summer. I just should record a personal note of thanks, I think, to senior staff at NHS Improvement for the continued professionalism with which they are continuing to both engage in the integration work but also do their very demanding day-to-day jobs at a time of major organisational change. I've been incredibly impressed with the commitment and professionalism, but obviously that sits alongside the need for us to now to really make progress across the summer so that we get the new arrangements into place. In terms of provider news, just picking a couple of items out from the report for completeness, really great that Brighton and Sussex NHS Trust has been able to exit special measures for financial problems. That's really positive. It's also good to see East Sussex exiting special measures for quality following an improved CQC inspection. So still some more work to do, I think, in both those trusts. I think, but nonetheless, exiting special measures is an important step. On the flip side, it is unfortunate and disappointing that Norfolk and Norwich University Hospitals has entered special measures for quality in the period since our last board meeting, with concerns raised about urgent and emergency care, culture and governance, which need to be addressed. And obviously NHSI is ensuring that we are helping and supporting that trust actively to improve now that it has had to enter special measures. And in conclusion, I guess it would be wrong of me not to mention and indeed to pay a huge tribute to the staff and the leadership of Salisbury NHS Foundation Trust.
Yes, absolutely.
I think, as we know, since the last meeting of this board, this district general hospital in the south of England has once again faced the incredible challenge of having to care for and treat patients who've been poisoned with a military grade nerve agent. I think it's fair to say that that situation has never been encountered before in the NHS and probably not internationally. So it's an exceptional challenge, and I believe it's a huge testament to the staff and the leadership and the NHS of which they're a part that the care was delivered to those patients in that extremely challenging set of circumstances, not on one but on two sets of occasions. And during both, that the local hospital continued to be able to function effectively for local people. So for me, that was a real example of the NHS at its absolute best, and I think it's just worth noting that as we close this report.
Yes. Here. Yeah. Questions? Comments?
I was only going to say about Salisbury, it's fantastic to see everybody pulling behind, and the hospital reacted brilliantly. I'd also like to pay tribute to the paramedics and the ambulance staff Absolutely. As well, that were probably the first on site. So as a whole group of NHS staff, they've done superbly well.
Yes.
I strongly agree with that.
I think we should also record actually the members of NHS Improvement who've been supporting them as well.
Yes.
There have been a number of people from within our own team who have gone out to support
on both occasions.
On both occasions at strange hours of the day and night, and I think we should record our thanks and support for them too.
Great.
Glenys.
Just a question about how far we can then learn some lessons from the great operation that actually happened in Salisbury. Are there things that we should be collecting from that so that we can disseminate more generally across the system?
Yeah. I think, Kathy, there is an exercise
I think there
underway,
is an exercise,
there?
absolutely. I think that is, it's a very good point, and I think has been picked up, and people are going to do some learning across at a system level across that patch.
That's good to hear as well.
Because it did have a big impact, as Ruth implies, on ambulance services, and not just those who were involved directly, but it starts to have an impact across the service more broadly as well.
The anecdotal feedback I've had was that the leadership of the trust were particularly good at communicating and engaging with everyone involved, so that even if you weren't directly involved in the care or the management of the incident, that normal life in the hospital was able to go on because you felt you knew what was going on.
It's phenomenal.
That's absolutely right, and I think our comms support that's been helping them would reflect that as well.
Okay. Aaron.
Sure. During the Olympics, London had a bioterrorism strategy, and I just wonder whether that still exists and whether we should revisit that. I mean, this is a terrorist activity, and we were very, if you remember those days, a lot of nervousness around bioterrorism.
Sounds like we should feed that into the review as well. Okay.
Ian, on the 10-year review, forecast, strategy, vision, what's the balance of activity between a 10-year vision and a 5-year plan? Is that different?
I think both are going to be important in this. It's the way we're Simon and I, and NHS and I are starting to think about this, is that we actually need both. So there is a need to set out a clinical vision of what improvements we need to see for the population of this country in areas like cancer, survival and diagnosis, to give us something to aim at over the 10-year period. And I think that naturally is one set of streams of activity. I think it has to absolutely be backed, though, by a recognition that the new money starts to flow from the 1st of April 2019. And we know we need changes now to how the NHS is organised and how it prepares to drive the improvements in care. So there will be a series of work streams that actually do the 5-year look as well as the 10-year look. 10-year look is about a set of clinical destinations we need to get to.
Okay.
But there's absolute focus within this on how we're going to actually run the NHS over the next 5 years. Financial flows, workforce, the institutions and how they are governed, how they work together to create integrated care. Those things all need to be in place and starting to move from the 1st of April next year.
Do you think there are, there always are, constraints within which we are operating, some of which are imposed by decisions that have been taken, or are, then the implication that some of which are natural? Is your sense that that we are being encouraged to test whether some of those constraints remain valid? I'm thinking about the legislative environment. I'm thinking about some of the tariff type of discussions, as well as some of the workforce structures that might exist now that might not be relevant in an AI world, in a powered world, in a technology-enabled world. Have we got, do you think, broad scope and canvas upon which to design?
I feel very much that we have. I mean, this is a request to the leadership of the NHS, most notably to NHSE and NHSI, but to the NHS leadership as a whole, to explain what we're going to aim for 10 years clinically and how we're going to run the NHS and indeed spend the money over the next 5 years. I think the fact that we've been specifically asked to look across that broad canvas is really helpful. I think the specific that you referred to, as an example, we've been asked to have a look and recommend any legislative changes that we feel are necessary. Now, that may not be the biggest and most immediate driver, but the fact that the NHS leadership has been asked what legislation would benefit the NHS, rather than being told from government, this is the legislation you're going to have, that feels a good indication. And so I'm expecting this process to be very wide-ranging, very involving of the NHS in its widest sense, as well as NHSE and NHSI, and to produce a set of recommendations which can be both sufficiently visionary to give us confidence we can get to somewhere great for the people of this country, but also sufficiently detailed that we have a proper route map to spend the money and drive the change from the 1st of April next year.
And that will therefore, and this is where I'll close, that inevitably therefore, you think we'll be far enough down the line to have an appropriate conversation about capital? Because that's the bit that's missing at the moment. We've got revenue, but the capital conversation is yet to come. And in some respects, the vision, the plan, the revenue has to be also linked into the capital.
I think there are 3 elements actually that are critical to this, of which capital is one, social care would be another.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely.
And the money for the education and training of our workforce, which obviously is critical to our future. And those 3 key financial elements, obviously, we had great news on getting the clarity on the revenue funding, but we didn't get those. They remain critically important for our endeavour.
Because the others, the plan and the vision will to some extent won't work unless you've got all the enablers in place.
No, and I suppose that in some ways we have to start from what we know now,
Yeah, I'm
and
not
on all those areas, I think we have to set out what we need to see, and so whether it's workforce and how that needs to be resourced and changed, well, we can't produce a plan without addressing workforce, because obviously that's where the work is done. In terms of capital and estates, we know we've got £5.5 billion of backlog maintenance in the provider sector, and we need technology investment to drive the change. So both on the bleeding edge and on the day-to-day, there's a capital issue there. We will have a capital and estates element to the plan, and we'll have to have that discussion and build that so that we bring it all together.
Richard?
Since we last met, the other change, I guess, is that Jeremy Hunt isn't with us. anymore. Any reflections on the new Secretary of State's priorities and any view around any shifts in direction, or does it we carry on as before?
Yes, it was first change in Secretary of State for many years, and having worked with the longest serving Secretary of State, we've clearly got a new Secretary of State, Matt Hancock. I think he has started communicating his priorities, and I think they would include workforce, and he's certainly wanted to express the importance of an engaged, motivated and effective workforce in the delivery of modern care. He's also been talking a lot, which I very much welcome, about the importance of technology in changing care, which would be another theme that we'll be exploring fully in the long-term plan. So I think those would be a couple of areas that he has been out and started to stress in what are very early days in his tenure as Secretary of State.
I noticed one of the comments reported in one of the esteemed journals around a focus on old-fashioned management practices. Any reflections back on that, Ian, on what that may mean, particularly as we move towards our creation of new Chief People Officer?
Yeah, I think I would approach it by saying that, as Dido mentioned previously, the issue of culture and leadership, those issues about how we set the culture within organisations and across the wider NHS, and the calibre and capability of our leaders to be part of delivery and delivering a good culture is always going to be absolutely critical in any human endeavour. It is in any line of business, but in a healthcare setting that's even more important. And so I think it is no surprise that we will be wanting to have a lot to say about that, as we've already started to. So this issue of leadership and culture is a matter of debate at every board. I'd be amazed if it wasn't included within issues around the long-term plan as well.
The one reflection I'd add, I think, with any transition of Secretary of State, is it's extremely important that we as a board don't get distracted and focus on it. We need to remember our responsibilities and play a role in inducting a new Secretary of State, but also make sure that we're not taking our eye off the ball because there's some change that's happened around us in the system. I feel that pretty keenly, especially as we go into the summer, that there is a huge amount of work that Ian and the executive team here and Simon and the team in NHS England are united on, but my goodness, we've got to make sure we maintain the momentum.
For me, that's the big issue. The layer cake remains the plan, the delivery plan underneath it, the work we have to do to integrate NHS England and NHS Improvement to give ourselves a delivery vehicle, and looking at 18, 19 and making sure that the NHS continues to prosper.
Indeed.
That's a lot to be getting on with.
Yeah, indeed. Anything else, Cathy?
Just a quick one, just going back to you make reference in your report about the Gosport Hospital, and I just wanted to update the board from what's actually even written there, that when we've written out to trusts, and we've actually heard back from every single trust now about the syringe drivers, so
Okay.
pleased to say that that's
Great.
closed off with the help of regions and the patient safety team. That is that's complete, so action moving forward there.
Good.
Good. That's excellent.
Okay. Any other comments on Ian's report? Excellent.